Welcome back to Men and the City. In today's video, we're going to talk about Masco-Nationalism once again. We're going to talk about the neo-masculine movement. So I'm going to title today's video, Now is the Time for Men of Action. Now, I want to begin this video by referencing a book that I've talked about a couple of times on this channel called The True Believer by Hoffer. And for those of you who have not read through this, I strongly recommend it because it does an excellent job of framing the psychology of mass movements and how societal upheaval unfolds, especially in the minds of men. Well, at the beginning of the book, Hoffer, I guess towards the end of the book, Hoffer talks about men of words and men of action. Listen to what he says here. A movement is pioneered by men of words, materialized by fanatics, and consolidated by men of action. So there are two revolutionary archetypes here that Hoffer establishes. One are men of words, the other are men of action. What does that mean? Well, men of words, in effect, are the dissidents. They are the voices of dissent. They are the essayists, the polemicists, the YouTubers, the conspiracy theorists, and otherwise, who are advocating for reform and change. They are calling attention to corruption and decay and inefficiencies in the legacy structure. And we're going to talk more about exactly who those folks are in just a moment. The men of action carry the baton of reform and revolt. These are men that actually build new movements, that organize new administrative structures, that challenge the status quo in a material sense. In other words, they are the boots on the ground that actually go in and shake things up. Well, the reason I wanted to talk about this delineation, or these two archetypes, is because there is a handoff. There's a transition period wherein the men of words hand off the protest movement to the men of action. And I think we're at the beginning stages of that process in the West. Now, this brings us back to Masco-Nationalism. Men of words are men of disruption, and disruption or dissent has been fulminating over the last 10 or 20 years. It's manifest in the Manosphere. It's manifest in the alternative media complex. It's manifest in the America First movement. These are various iterations of the same sense of frustration. The idea that the status quo doesn't work. It's, you might say, the revolt of the frustrated and sexless men, that the sexual marketplace has broken down. And therefore, they're suggesting that there needs to be a rebalancing. But of course, men of words are less interested in the reform, at least not in the beginning. More so, they're agitated, they're frustrated, they're disillusioned. And so they voice that discontent in online media or various splinter groups of all shapes and sizes. I've just mentioned a few. But during that process, what you're beginning to see happen is a broad-based awakening, an articulation of these various problems. In other words, men in particular today in the West are very frustrated and angry, but what the men of words do, what these dissidents and disruptors do, is give voice to that frustration, explain the underlying causes for it, and by extension rationalize the necessity for reform. I would also argue that Donald Trump is a man of words. He's a man of words. He is not a man of action. Why do I say that? Well, Donald Trump is representative. He's the embodiment of a broad-based frustration. And certainly he is attempting to take control of government on that basis. But he is not really a revolutionary. He's not really a reformer. He's trying essentially to make incremental changes to a dying order. And so that makes him a man of words. Men of words also tend, and this is very important to note, tend to go their own way, right? Again, This is reflective in the MGTOW movement, the men going their own way shift. These are folks that say, hey, the status quo is broken, there's nothing we can do about it, we understand why, and so we're just going to sort of disappear into the ether. These men tend to be very good at outlining the frustrations, the inefficiencies, the corruptions of the status quo, but they don't really have a whole lot of answers for how to fix it. Again, this brings us back to Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump, I think, does an effective job at voicing the frustration of the masses, but he really doesn't have any clue as to how to reform the system. And in fact, I would go one step farther and say, he doesn't really understand how broken the system is. If he did, I think his actions would be considerably different than they are. He would start the process of building new movements and new parties, so forth and so on. He's not really doing that. And furthermore, I'm not sure that he is capable of doing that. But nonetheless, there is this handoff, there's this shift, there's this transition into an action phase in which men of action come to the fray. Now, I don't know that we're quite there yet, but these various protest movements that you're seeing across Europe, for instance, you know, the farmers and the truckers and the laborers, the factory workers, they're beginning to organize. They're beginning to barricade major highways. They're ceasing and desisting from simply taking the destructive policies or accepting or practicing forbearance and withstanding the self-destruction all around them. They're beginning to revolt. They're beginning to say no more. They're beginning to band together in such a way that takes action. And within that framework, you're beginning to see new parties. Now, new parties are surging across Europe, to be sure, parties like AfD and others that have been around for some time, but they're assimilating various men of words into their movements, and that is this transition that I'm talking about. Now is the time for men of action. Now is the time to harness this frustration and this dissent in this broader neo-masculine movement that I've talked about. And so what comes next are new parties and new movements that harmonize and assimilate these dissident movements. Now, I want to leave you with this quote from Hoffer. He says, "The old order abdicates without a struggle, or because the men of words allies himself with strong men of action the moment chaos threatens to break loose." Now, I think we can say with great confidence that however strong these protest movements may be, you know, again, this contentiousness at the U.S.-Mexican border is part of this, right? These governors of U.S. states that are beginning to disobey federal law to do nothing about the border and let all of these illegal immigrants in. All of these various constituent parts of this mass frustration, however successful they may be at organizing themselves, I think we can say with confidence that the legacy structure is still powerful. It's still overwhelmingly in control. And so what Hoffer is saying here is that either the status quo itself is going to completely abdicate, it's just going to throw in the towel, or you're going to go into a period of chaos and upheaval. Now, I have said repeatedly on this channel that I think it's the latter. We're going into a period of chaos and upheaval. And that chaos and upheaval comes in waves, right? It's the banking crisis, it's the border crisis, it's the specter of regional or global war. All of these various tremors of disruption that begin to converge, and they converge in such a way that destroys stability in the system. We're still in the early stages of that, but that chaos is not going to feed on itself in such a way that will disempower opposition groups or dissident groups or men of words. In fact, it's going to bring men of action into the fray. So the next stage in this process is this transition, this handoff from men of words, people like Tucker Carlson or Donald Trump or Andrew Tate, you know, take your pick, to men of action. These are the boots on the ground. These are the practical men of action that are going to put together these various constituent parts into broader movements. And that is where we're headed next. So, stay tuned for more, and we'll talk soon.